The second most populous country in the world is the epicenter of a devastating wave of COVID infections, registering record deaths. Despite being the world's largest manufacturer of vaccines, India has administered just about 220 million doses in 4.5 months. Welcome to Health Analytics Asia, and today we have with us public policy and health systems expert Dr. Chandrakant Lahariya. Dr. Lahariya has previously worked with the World Health Organization, helping formulate India's national vaccination policy. Dr. Lahariya, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me for this conversation.
Pleasure to have you. I want to get right into it, straight to the topic right now. India's COVID vaccinations. Union Minister Prakash Javadekar a few days ago said that India would fully vaccinate its entire population by December 2021. And so far, the country has fully vaccinated about 4% of its population, under 4% of its population, about 45 million people. How do you think 1.3 billion, the remaining 1.3 billion of the population, over 96%, can be fully vaccinated in the next 7 months?
Let's look at some of the numbers. Till now, India has vaccinated 220 million doses have been administered in the country. If we look at the vaccine pipeline in months ahead, June and July 2021, there are 120 million for June and something like 150 million for July. The two put together will make 270 million shots over and above what 220 million already been administered. The total by end of July would be by best estimate around 490 million shots. If we go back and recall, the original target was 600 million vaccine shot to be administered by July for 300 million population in the priority group. So definitely India is not going to achieve the original target set by the government to administer 600 million shots or 300 million people vaccinated. Now coming to vaccinating entire population in the country, that's an ambitious goal and that's what is a good idea. However, we should also be mindful that the vaccine projections made by the national government to be available from August to December, that is 2.16 billion shots, are based upon availability of some of the vaccines which are still in the clinical trial stage. There are 4 vaccines which are either in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 clinical trials. And unless we know that those vaccines are licensed, we cannot really predict the availability of vaccine. Second part is that the country has some of the vaccines which are already licensed, and we have seen from experience of those vaccine manufacturers that while they are ambitious in projecting their production capacity, scaling up vaccine production is not entirely in the hand of vaccine manufacturer because it depends upon number of external factors such as availability of raw materials. So achieving the projected target is going to be challenged. But third and most important part is that even if vaccines are available, we know that some of the vaccines will be given in 2 shots at the interval of 12 to 16 weeks. So to fully vaccinate someone, individual need to receive 2 shots and then another 2 weeks would have passed. In that backdrop, if somebody received Covishield vaccine by late September or early October, then that person is not expected to receive second shot till early 2022. So how can we say that somebody who is starting in October will be fully vaccinated in the same year? He or she cannot be fully vaccinated. So India would not be able to vaccinate the target population fully till early 2022. That is a realistic estimate. Anybody who would receive vaccine shot other than a few vaccines starting October 2021 will have to wait till early 2022 to get their second shot. So that's going to be challenged. In my opinion, India is unlikely to have the kind of vaccine doses available which have been projected. However, country is expected to have a fairly decent number of vaccine shots available starting October 2021, and which will be a good thing. What we also need to do sufficient planning that how and on a rolling basis the vaccines become available, how those will be distributed, how the administration of those shots will be ensured. We need to remember one thing, that availability is not delivery.
Okay, Dr. Balram Bhargav said yesterday that by mid-July, India would get 10 million doses per day. What are your thoughts on that?
we need to remember that it is not about 10 million shots administered one single day. If we want to achieve a target of 10 million shots every day on average over a period of month, in that month, country would need a 300 million shots available. Now we know the vaccine availability for July is something like 150 million shots. Even August and September, we don't expect that kind of availability. So to achieve the 10 million shots for a sustained period of time, it can happen only in a month when country has a 300 million shots available for entire month. So I think country would not be able to achieve a daily average of 10 million shots a month till late September or early October.
Okay, now the health ministry repeatedly, pretty much on a daily basis, it puts out numbers on the number of vaccine doses that the states have available with them, and the remaining doses still available with the states. And these numbers are on a national basis, pretty much around 1.2, 1.3 crores on an average. Now, and there are widespread claims by the states that they don't have the doses that they need. And then there are reports that people are not getting the slots and so on and so forth. Now, vaccine procurement is starting to become a center versus state battle now. India's states are scampering in the global market, and some of them are claiming that the vaccine manufacturers are not entertaining their requests. The center, on the other hand, claims that this is what the states wanted: more control and more power in their vaccinations, and this is what they're getting. Do you think this is all working out very well for India?
I'm not clear about one thing, that what is the purpose of liberalized vaccine policy where there are differential rates for different sectors and the states are expected to purchase. If the idea was that to increase competition between the manufacturers and the states, competition between the states to buy vaccine from two vaccine manufacturers, which with the thinking that it will result in increased production capacity by the manufacturer, then in the short term, that goal cannot be achieved, because we know that vaccine production is dependent upon multiple other factors, including availability of raw material, and which is unlikely to happen. If the idea were to have a more demand from the state and then manufacturer have an advantage of scaling up their production capacity in long run, then in my opinion, doing that in a mid of the pandemic is not the right strategy. So whether it's a short-term goal or long-term goal, this delegating or expecting state to purchase vaccines directly from the vaccine manufacturer is not a good strategy, especially for pandemic period. Now coming to the states purchasing vaccine, what we need to remember that state governments in India already have a weak purchasing capacity. One of the division which usually in departments of health in state government is weakest, it is a procurement and supply division. Moreover, states do not have a sufficient experience in vaccine purchase. The state governments have a limited experience in purchase of the vaccines. And because we know that traditionally in all government programs, universal immunization program, also for pulse polio immunization program, it is a central government which purchase the vaccine and distribute to the states. The responsibility of vaccine purchase with the central government, the responsibility of delivering vaccine is with the state government. So all of a sudden changing this responsibility to state has placed them in a difficult situation. Moreover, the bigger disadvantage of making the differential vaccine pricing policy essentially means that states have to compete with each other to secure limited vaccine from vaccine manufacturer. In that process, states would end up far higher price than the central government would have paid. And essentially, every state would pay higher than what central government would have been paying for vaccines. Now, the only difference is the cost of vaccination had been shifted to the state government, but at the end of it, it is a government money. But now it's coming from state government, but ultimately it's a government money, and doing so is very inefficient. It is also resulting in inequity because now richer state, larger state, which have a financial capacity, are more likely to buy vaccine than the smaller state. We are also seeing another form of inequity, that while states are scrambling to secure the vaccine, but a private sector facilities have all the vaccine they require, and which essentially means the vaccines are being sold at far higher cost and being administered at far higher cost, and are becoming unaffordable for even middle class, who would now have to wait for the vaccine for many weeks and months to come.
Okay, so the same liberalized pricing and new vaccination policy, the document mentions and it prioritizes second doses over first doses. Now, this brings me to a slight inconsistency. I'm sorry, in how to approach vaccinations across countries. Many countries are focusing on vaccinating or covering as many people as possible with the first dose, and then the second dose comes later. What do you think of India's policy on this?
Well, the vaccine delivery strategy is always a combination of three things. One, a policy formulation, second, assuring supply, and third is a delivery. Now, we have seen in most of the country, not most of the country, all of the countries across the world first secured their supplies and then started opening up vaccination for different target population. The prioritization of vaccination has been done across the country on three criteria. One, to prevent or protect the healthcare workers or frontline workers. Second, to reduce morbidity and mortality. So they opened up for elderly population and 45 plus population with some disease condition. And third is to reduce transmission. We know for a country like India, there is a limited vaccine supply. India does not have a kind of supply which United Kingdom or United States had nearly assured provisions. So in this kind of limited supply, the prioritization is really helpful. In that process, the vaccination should be opened for a target population, which India had done. India has a vast population of 45 plus, which is 300 million people. Essentially, we required 600 million shots. In other setups, while they opened up vaccination or they were focusing on one shot, they had assured supply. And by the time the second shot, more supply would have become available, people would have become eligible for second shot. But in India, we know that there is a far higher or greater population than the vaccines are in the pipeline. So it's important that while first shot is administered to the people, it is also equally important that second shot is administered on the time. So I think that's a correct strategy that focuses ensuring people get the second shot. Other part is that India already has a long duration between the two shots. So delaying beyond the recommended gap between two shots, which is now 12 weeks, will not be appropriate. If it was 4 weeks or 6 weeks, then it would have been a different story. But scientifically, the gap of 12 weeks or higher does not provide any additional advantage. So after 12 weeks, people should get the second shot. So India's strategy to focus upon second shot, especially when there is a limited supply, the right strategy. Only the spare shots should be given to as a first shot. I would rather go to the extent that till the vaccine supply is assured, the vaccination should not be opened or should be put on hold for 18 to 44 years of age group. It is not about administering vaccine, it's about doing it really well, providing the protection to the people to the full extent. Otherwise, there is no advantage of doing this thing. Spreading vaccine too thin is not helpful.
Okay, a bit of a retrospect here. India's finance minister announced a 9 billion rupee grant for vaccine research and development. And this does not include manufacturing costs. So this is purely for vaccine research. Do you think India could have done more in vaccine development, invested more and invested early? Because this grant did come in November 2020. And by then, a lot of serious vaccine candidates were already in later stages of trials.
I think that's one area where India definitely could have done more. In fact, what we need to remember that much of the vaccine research and development in most of the countries where vaccine manufacturing happens is supported or comes through the scientists and researchers who initially worked in the government institution. Government institutions, including research and academic institutions, have an important role in health research and development, be it vaccines or medicines. Most of the scientists or researchers who work at the leading private institutions also at some point of time are trained or have worked in the government institutions. So investing in research and development is an integral part of strategy which government should follow for health sector. In fact, we know that in India also, there was a vibrant public and private sector vaccine industry or vaccine manufacturing units starting 1960s and 1970s. However, India closed some of the public sector units starting 2008 onwards. While we were preparing for this pandemic, and the kind of consideration which is being given to revive or utilize public sector units to produce one of the COVID-19 vaccine, that kind of thinking should have started last year, October and November. For a country of the size of India, even for 600 million vaccine doses, reliance on the two vaccine manufacturers in the private sector was not the right strategy. In general, we develop and we work on the research and development to build future capacity. Not paying attention on public sector units, research and development for vaccines is an step which, if we have could have taken earlier, India would have been better positioned now. But fortunately, we have learned from that, and there is some attention on that. However, I would say that also need to be expedited, accelerated.
Right. So India, we are now receding in the receding part of the second wave. The first wave peaked in around mid-September of 2020. The second wave began over 6 months later, and yet the second wave hit the country the hardest. What do you think was the reason behind that?
Well, so this is the way viruses behave. In the first wave, when it started, it was usually most of the parts of the country were under stringent lockdown. And it was the beginning of the transmission. Virus was very limited parts of the country, and it was transmitting at a slower rate. So because of restrictions and lockdowns and a lot of apprehensions, people were also following the COVID appropriate behavior. However, in the second wave, and before the second wave, I believe there have been laxity at all levels, including the policy making levels, the preparedness of health system level, and also on the parts of the people. We have seen that there had been many series of events where mass gathering were happening. The policy makers who were advising others to follow COVID appropriate behavior, but there were gatherings and groupings which were facilitated or encouraged by the policy makers. And some of those events happened at the peak or at the early part of second wave, which resulted in the virus had a free hand to spread. And once virus started spreading, we have seen a large number of cases across the country. But we also need to be mindful that this particular wave happened in the times when there was a new variants of concern which were spreading or which had a higher transmissibility. So all of these factors considered, there was a higher number of cases across the country. There were many different factors, including insufficient younger or adult population is higher in the Indian population, and there were more cases in that which were proportionate.
Right. And now with the second wave receding, there are already talks of and preparation for the third wave. Some say it will happen sometime around July, August. Some say it will affect children more. Is there a science behind these speculations?
What we need to remember that when the second wave started, by then there was a nationwide survey which found that around 22% of Indian population had some form of antibody, which essentially means 78% population was susceptible. So India started or entered into second wave with 78% of its population still susceptible. With the kind of infection ongoing in the second wave, we are still in the mid of the second wave. It can be estimated that around 50 to 60% of Indian population would have developed either asymptomatic or symptomatic COVID-19 infection, which essentially means the pool of susceptible population for any future wave would be half of what it was a few months ago. When the pool being reduced, but susceptible population still being around, essentially means that there is a real risk of having a third wave. Now, this third wave, we really cannot predict when it would happen. It would also be dependent upon how quickly India can scale up the vaccination drive. It will also be dependent upon how and what kind of mutation happens in the virus and how it changes its pathogenicity, infectivity, or transmissibility. So there are many unknowns. But one thing is sure, that the susceptible pool being reduced, but still being a significant chunk, there is a real risk of a third wave. So if we analyze the disease epidemiology, and we know that after natural infection, person is protected for 6 to 9 months, it can be said that third wave could be seen somewhere around November 21 to early part of 2022. As far as children are concerned, as I have already highlighted, children have always been infected with the disease at the similar rate which adults have been affected. However, we also know that children do not develop severe disease. The children do not develop severe disease because they do not have a particular receptor to which the SARS-CoV-2 latches to infect the lungs. And that's an advantage for the children. So I don't foresee any reason, neither epidemiological evidence from any country that in the third or fourth wave children are more affected, nor data from India which indicate that children would be more affected, nor change in the virus or scientific changes, scientific evidence that the virus would infect children more seriously. So there is no reason to believe that children would be affected in third wave or any subsequent wave. They are as much risk of getting infection. There is no change in their risk of getting severe disease.
Right. So I want to circle back to vaccinations a little more, because to vaccinate a population size as large as India, we have, of course, like you said, we have several factors to take care of, including availability and supply. Now we have about 1.4 billion people to vaccinate and fully vaccinate. The question of vaccine-induced immunity, how long it lasts, is still not entirely clear. But what we know for to certain degree of certainty is that it's not going to be a lifetime immunity. So at some point, someone who has received the vaccine will lose that immunity. So in India's case, because the whole vaccination can push into well into 2022, is there a chance that the people who got vaccinated at the start of the vaccination drive will lose the immunity, and then India goes into an endless cycle without entering herd immunity at all?
So the current understanding is that vaccine provide protections for 6 to 9 months. And that's at the population level protection, that 80% of the people who are vaccinated would be protected for the period of 6 to 9 months. Now, which essentially means that there would be a period of time when people need to be vaccinated once again. We also know epidemiologically and scientifically that most of the respiratory viruses, the immunity or protection lasts shorter duration than some other viruses or disease conditions such as hepatitis B, where you receive the full immunization, you are protected for life. But in respiratory illnesses such as influenza, you need to do a regular revaccination or provide booster shot. This is a respiratory illness, and it is very likely that we would need to offer vaccine or booster shot to the individual. Currently, we do not know that when that would be required. However, it can be said that something like 9 months to a year later, they might be needing another booster of the vaccine. But the key difference would be initially it will be 2 dose completed schedule, but subsequently it would be 1 booster shot. But people would require booster shot. We need to get more understanding in this area. But that is also true that once a fairly a large number of people are either develop natural infection and develop immunity and then vaccinated, then the circulation or transmission of virus in community will come down, and then the risk would be very different than the kind of risk we are facing when the entire population was susceptible and some have developed natural infection.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lahariya. One final question: a realistic scenario for India come December 2021 with regards to vaccination, third wave, and herd immunity?
I think by the end of this year, India would have sufficient vaccine availability to ensure that anyone who is willing and want to get vaccinated can get vaccinated in the timely manner. I also think that by end of this year, we should be prepared with a better infrastructure. People should be following COVID appropriate behavior, and the policymakers should be ready for any eventuality of any subsequent wave. I also think that by early next year, there would be a situation where we can believe and we can come out of the COVID-19 pandemic scenario or the kind of challenges world is facing. I don't want to use word herd immunity. Herd immunity is little oversold in this context. There are many unknown in this area. We really don't know how long immunity after natural infection lasts. We really don't know how long immunity after vaccination lasts. The virus is continuously changing. So while we may have protection, or individual may have a protection against the infection or the type of strain it caused, but if a new strain emerges, it would not serve any purpose. So it's too premature and too early to talk about herd immunity. I think vaccines following COVID appropriate behavior is the only right strategy, and reaching to as much population as possible will take the world out of pandemic.
All right. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Lahariya. It was a pleasure speaking to you. And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you again really soon. Till then, take care and goodbye.
Thank you.